the way, I think it was a right decision to ask our Prosecutor General to be on the last panel. He gave some additional portion of energy for our final. Yes, I think it was really a very interesting panel. Now it's our closing small panel. If you remember, last year we had similar panel with the same stellar trio of our moderators. Thank you very much for your job during these two days. If you remember, 1 year ago, we had a panel when I asked them to tell me, what do you think from your point of view, three main crises for year ahead, I mean from September 16 to September 17. And they gave their forecast. And now, very briefly, during maybe 1 minute, please help me to remind what did they say. Because I promised we will check your quality of profits.
Because it will continue to fester and it will continue to export refugees. Problem number 2 strikes me as North Korea. The problem is the guy is mad or crazy or power hungry, and this is now, I think, 5 tests in this year. You're going to end up with maybe an arsenal of 15, 20 sophisticated weapons. What does he want to do with them? We all think we understand, but we don't. And the third great risk, I believe, if Donald Trump were elected President of the United States.
What are the 3 crises I would worry about? Well, 2 overlap with Fareed's. One is obviously North Korea. It's clear that after several decades of hoping that negotiations and sanctions would work, we have a North Korea with maybe a dozen nuclear weapons, with a whole set of ballistic missiles, and as at most several years away, being able to put some of those warheads on missiles that can reach the United States. Secondly, the Middle East. Fareed, again, rightly put the emphasis on Syria. I would take a larger version of Fareed's one, though, for my third challenge, which is American political governability.
You know what, these 2 guys are so articulate, so well-informed, so fluent on global affairs. I'm tempted to predict a military coup in Switzerland, just to be...
Something more domestic.
Just to be a little bit different and to make you all think for a second. And finally, I want to bring it to Ukraine. Actually, Victor, I take up your challenge. I'm going to put Ukraine in crisis. Sorry, guys, but this country right now feels to me in pretty deep trouble. You've got some good stories to tell, and we saw the videos, and you're turning your economy around to a certain extent, and you can tell people around the world that it's a good time to invest and everything else. But your politics is still deeply dysfunctional. And
I will just tell to everybody good news, important good news. I received preliminary agreement from Fareed, Richard, and Steven that they will be our moderators for next year. Okay, and I promise that we will check, and it's a reality check. I think now we're sure that they are relatively okay as prophets, and now please help me to understand where we are in 1 year in the 3 following crises or 3 following situations. First, North Korea. Second, Brexit. And third, Ukrainian-Russian, even I cannot call this crisis, Ukrainian-Russian war. Please, you are first.
Happy to. On North Korea. I think you'll continue to have sanctions. It won't make a difference. North Korea will continue to test. And I think, let me suggest 2 possibilities. At some point, the United States shoots down a North Korean missile on the basis that we don't know whether it's carrying a nuclear weapon and we don't know where it is heading. I do not believe that we will allow North Korea to continue to test in an unlimited fashion. Another possibility might be next year, possibly the year after, is North Korea will announce a testing freeze. It will decide it has done enough tests to satisfy its need to learn, and it will challenge the world then to respond to that.
I think that the big news in on the North Korean front is, quite honestly, that North Korea has achieved its objective. North Korea is now a nuclear weapon power. There is absolutely no prospect of a total denuclearization of North Korea. That is why Kim has been testing with such speed. They now have, I said 15 to 20. The CIA's estimate is that they now have about 20. They have the means to launch them. They have the capacity to threaten South Korea, Japan, possibly Hawaii, and therefore the United States. And at this point, it is pretty clear the Chinese have very little leverage over them because they have been doing this in defiance of the Chinese. So the new norm is going to be exactly as Richard said. Can you get a freeze? Can you get a test ban? Can you get negotiations? But what that means is that we are accepting a new nuclear weapon state in the world.
Yeah, I agree with Fareed. I think this story is done in a way, and that the North Koreans, from their point of view, have won. They've got what they wanted. Donald Trump's rhetoric, I think, in the end was unhelpful because he climbed himself up a hill, and now it's not clear how he's going to get himself down again. Personally, I don't see any prospect of an American preemptive military strike, and I don't think Kim Jong-il is a madman, and I don't think he's going to do anything which would require all of the military establishment in the United States to believe that a military strike is possible. So therefore, I see the status quo in a sense. The only decisions America has to make is whether to start talking to the North Koreans. But from my point of view, the North Koreans have won in this face-off.
Yeah, thank you. First, relatively good news that in 1 year, nobody will push button. Okay? Brexit.
No, just to be clear on that, there won't be a nuclear exchange or anything like that. I do think that too many of the experts are discounting too completely the possibility of a limited American military action against a North Korean launch of a missile. And then the question is what would happen. I would not discount that. Brexit's going to happen. In the sense it's going to, well, next year, it'll still be within the 2-year period of negotiation, so we won't reach any deadline. But the talks will continue, and the British hopes for a soft Brexit, I believe, will not materialize. I think all the energy in Europe is now in Paris and Berlin, and I believe that the inclination to allow the British to have their cake and eat it will not come to pass. So I think it'll be a pretty tough Brexit.
Yeah, you know, Brexit is one of these areas where I can't quite see it not happening, and I can't quite see it happening, by which I mean the British have painted themselves into such a bad corner that they are beginning to realize how hard a Brexit is going to be, because the Europeans and Madame Merkel will make this even clearer once the election is over. There is a difference between being a member and not a member. And you cannot get the benefits of being a member without being outside. And so I think they will learn that they're going to have to reconstitute a whole new bureaucracy that didn't exist. They're going to have to negotiate hundreds and hundreds of treaties on hundreds and hundreds of things with the rest of the world, all of them on much worse terms, because, of course, you are not offering access to the entire European market, you are just offering access to the British market. So what I notice in going to Britain over the last year is a shrunken Britain in terms of its attitude. It has become much more parochial, much more internally focused, much more, if you think about the Britain of Tony Blair, he was here, right? Tony Blair's Britain was truly a global Britain, a Britain that commanded a space on the world stage, that used its UN Security Council veto, its relationship with America, its military, in a way that was quite extraordinary. The Britain of today has a navy that they say would not even be able to defend the English Channel, has a prime minister that has barely given an interview to an international media organization, it has a foreign minister who used to be known to be the guy who couldn't stop talking, and now has gone into a witness protection program, so you can barely hear him. It's a very, very sad, for somebody who admires Britain, it's a very sad fall from greatness.
Yeah, and British point of view.
I'm not sure if I should talk or just start weeping in this corner of mine that I've painted myself into. I'd love to disagree with my two colleagues here because their outlook is so bleak, but I really can't. I think it is going to be a hard and miserable Brexit. I think the interesting thing to see is whether Theresa May, our Prime Minister, some of you may not have heard of her, but she, believe me, is actually our Prime Minister, whether she survives to actually see this 2-year deadline through in March 2019. Fareed says, our Foreign Secretary, whom some of you may know, Boris Johnson, he says that he's sort of gone into witness protection. Actually, he's just come out of witness protection. He's just written a hugely inflammatory piece in one of our papers talking about his vision of Brexit, which is somewhat different from Theresa May's and represents something of a, to many people, leadership challenge. So if we're talking about what might happen over the next year, it is possible that Theresa May be toppled before she's even delivered this Brexit. But either way, I totally agree with my two colleagues that the rest of Europe, frankly, is losing patience with this already. They see no reason to be giving Britain concessions and special treatment. The leverage is all on Europe's side, not on Britain's side. And as a Brit, I will, after this, go and weep softly in a corner.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And now, please, about us, about Ukrainian-Russian war. Where we are in 1 year?
Unfortunately, I don't see anything changing with Crimea. Mr. Putin will be focused on his electoral situation. I think the one interesting possibility, and we've talked about it a lot, is tabling of this idea of some type of a peacekeeping international presence. And I think that's the first interesting diplomatic opening we've had in a while. It's not acceptable in its current terms. I understand that. But it gives people, Kurt Volker and others, I believe, something to work with. And what I'm also hoping, quite possibly, is the backdrop improves. You've already got the congressional sanctions from our country. I think there's a chance, I'm not predicting it, but I think there's a decent chance you could have American lethal aid to Ukraine. So I think the context for some type of diplomatic movement might improve.
I agree with everything Richard said. I think that if you want to look at the glass half full, I think the way to think about it is when the crisis occurred, when Crimea was annexed, when eastern Ukraine was invaded, many people believed that after a few months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, the Europeans would be desperate to resume their energy business with Russia. The Italians and the French would want to be back to selling arms and agriculture and all that, and that the sanctions would slowly fade. In fact, the Europeans have been very tough. And the Americans have been very tough. The sanctions have stayed in place. The Germans have been tougher than people thought. I will tell you this because I don't think he's here, but the Cameron government used to tell me privately, if not for us, the sanctions will collapse because we are the steel in the spine of the Europeans. Well, the Cameron government did pass and the sanctions have stayed. So there is more going on there. The biggest luck that you have gotten right now is Donald Trump's incompetence. Because Trump has made it impossible for the American president to go soft on Russia. Because of the bizarre circus of Trump and Russia and the campaign, he has totally boxed himself in. If he makes a concession to Russia today, people will assume it is because Vladimir Putin paid him some money, right? So Congress has already passed, borderline unconstitutional legislation, which basically says the president has no authority in this area. And as a result of that, you have a Chancellor Merkel who remains tough, a Congress that remains tough, an American public that is very supportive of Ukraine and suspicious of Russia, and a Trump who on this issue is powerless. One final thought, though, the danger, and I know Richard and I agree on this because we talked about it, the biggest danger to the international system right now is American incompetence. I mean, you have no idea what Donald Trump's foreign policy is going to be any day. I mean, just think about what we went through with China. A couple of days after the election, he says he might recognize Taiwan. Then he says he won't. Then he says he'll start a trade war with China.
Ukraine,
then he says he won't.
About Ukraine and Russia, please.
So just worry about America.
Yeah, okay. Good answer. Maybe something optimistic for us
Something-
from our
Well, I was
British
the guy
friend.
last year who said there was going to be a complete crisis, so you're going to be lucky with me, Victor. But
That's why I ask.
I'll say a couple of things. I don't think the situation in the East is going to change. The conflict is going to stay, I think, sort of, I don't want to use the word frozen because that suggests frozen forever, but I don't see much change. Certainly don't see any change on Crimea. When Vladimir Putin talked about the North Koreans rather eating grass than making concessions, I think he was actually projecting. I think he was talking about himself and his policies in Ukraine. But I think you need to look at the politics of both Russia and Ukraine. And I see interesting things here. I was very interested to talk to Prime Minister Groisman. I think he's a growing figure in this country. I think, if I'm honest, I think there isn't enough discussion about the role of the president in this country and whether you need to be honest about the degree to which this president can deliver for Ukraine in the long run. And that's a debate that will happen in this country. I know it happens on the ground already. So I think politics is developing here in positive ways. And I think in Russia, the oil price shows no sign of long-term rise. The Russian economy is in a mess. And that is a big problem for Vladimir Putin. So it's all right me glibly saying he thinks that, he'd rather eat grass. Of course, it's not him. He's going to be very well. He's the richest man in the world, virtually. But Russians are going to be grappling with a long-term economic misery, and they will have to decide whether they are prepared to put up with it for the nationalist enterprise of staying in Crimea and East Ukraine. That's a decision they're going to have to face over the next year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, Richard, Farid, and Stephen, what I can promise to you that we will check your qualities of profits next year in Yalta.
You said something funny. You said the good news is that Richard, Farid, and Stephen have agreed to come back next year, which made me think, oh my God, what's the bad news? It's going to be really awful.
No. Next year in Yalta? Yes.
Next year at Yalta, as long as you provide the security.
I mean, in Yalta European Strategy Conference.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's give big hands to our great moderator. Thank you very much. Thank you.